Edmund. My name is David Patterson, and I am a franchisee in the Texas area. And one of the things I really loved about our conversation in Vegas was just sort of talking about your history with design and how you came up with the design. So I'd really kind of just like to go over that. So if you kind of give me a sort of your background on design and where you got your philosophy and things that you really like about it.
Some people might see it. They might be like, "Oh, so what are you?" And I'm kind of like a hybrid. I'm like a concept artist and experience designer, but I specialize in pre-visualization. So most of the projects that I'm brought into are to help create new worlds. And these worlds usually don't exist. So they could be for film, they could be for video games, VR, AR, and spatial experiences like exhibits, installations, and retail. So when a project comes on, I become the think tank and I help people brainstorm and strategize and illustrate possible solutions for a vision before anything is like ever built. That's like the power of pre-visualization.
Gotcha. Awesome. And then can you kind of start when you first started with the well-groomed design, kind of talk about your philosophy from kind of from start to finish there?
Yeah, so the philosophy is very simple. I follow myself and I found it very effective. The design principle of form follows function. I don't know if you're familiar, but basically the design principle explains that the shape of a building or object or service, whether it is physical or virtual, is all derived from the intended function or purpose of something, right? There's always like a cause and effect. And people often ask me like, they're like, oh, so what do you think something like looks like? And I always ask, well, what are its functions? Because once I can determine that, I can then prescribe the possible forms for it. Because with every project, there's infinite possibilities, right? But there's only a few correct answers. So form follows function. That's what carries through all of the design projects that I've worked on, including Well Groomed.
Gotcha. Okay. So we kind of have that front part area. And so you want to talk about that and sort of where your design philosophy went there with the coloring and the chairs and that sort of thing from the function of that.
Yeah, so that's a big question to unpack because, well, from the storefront to the back, um, all of it is determined by, again, like the function. So who occupies the space and when, right? What are the different occupant types? And if I were to be a reporter from the New York Times and I had, the employees and um, the clients walk out and I held a microphone up to them, I'd be like, so what do you think? What would we want them to say? Like what is our budget? What is our manufacturing capabilities? How much time have we got, right? All these things come together to form what it looks like from front to back. Um, I mean, it sounds kind of like science, but to me, it's like archaeology
Sure.
almost. Like you have these little bits and pieces of something, and you have to ask the right questions to get more information about it. And eventually, it's like putting together a puzzle piece. You'll see the form. So with the front of the store, I'm always thinking, well, with this room at in Wellgroom, what is the purpose, right? The purpose is to get people, checked in. But beyond that, we have no idea how the employees like what happened to them before they came in. We had no ideas what the clientele what happened to them before they came in, and so this space is almost like a grounding zone, almost like people can come in from all these different moods and what's happened to the day. But when they come into well groomed, how can we design a space to reset basically their mental state, right? How can we bring them into something perhaps is chaotic outside, perhaps it's hot, right? Maybe they're having a great day, maybe they're upset. How can we bring them to a space where the environment is designed to help them reset, maybe to calm them down, right? And that's why with the front, I avoided using too many bright colors that may be aggravating, that may be too active. And so I started using more passive colors like earth tones. Flat finishes on the wall is my proposal, and to have like spotlights that are carefully illuminating areas that people need to look at only. So they don't need to look at anything else, right? They need to look at the front desk, they need to look at the merchandise, and that's basically it. And maybe like the seating area if they need to wait for their dog, or any other points of interest as Welcome Design continues to add features. Um,
Yeah, I really like that you
but yeah,
use the
that's
word ground.
basically
I like that you use the word grounding because it was. I almost feel now like it's. I don't know if the word would be soil colors, but a ground sort of, the coloring there. I do feel just kind of the idea, just it does seem to sort of lower your blood pressure and it's sort of a grounding. So I definitely see that. So I love that. So now you want to kind of talk about sort of the back and kind of from a groomer's perspective?
Yeah, so from the back, so like I said, I mean, I didn't say this before, but I'm not a groomer. I'm not a scientist. And so all of these things I had to investigate, right, and ask questions. And Gabe, of course, is a great source because he has been a groomer himself, a bather, and he does social media. And so he was a prime resource for this research. And I said to him, I was like, well, what do you groomers like to see? What do you like to feel? And from all the grooming shops before, are there things that are missing that you would like to incorporate into this, right? And so from the front to the back, the front we're using mainly for the employees and people checking in. So it's to ground them, it's to calm them, right? But being a narrow color palette, because in the front it's mainly just those earth tones, like the green, yellow, desaturated earth tones. The back, because color influences a person's mind so much, it changes their mood literally, right? So in the back, same thing. You are in a space for so long, all day. What is the lighting and the colors that should be prescribed to assist in the functions that it needs to serve? So for the back, I reserved all the colors for the back because in the back, in the washing area, you'll see the greens, you'll see the yellows, reds, right? And all these are placed in strategically in the two. I guess the back is split into two pieces, but it's basically all the colors on one side and the colors are less on the other side because um, the grooming side, it's kind of like a light box. I think I've told you before, where the purpose is to have walls of similar color that are bright to reflect light. But to be in that space for too long, it's very tiring. So you have to have areas of rest, and that's where I reserved those other colors and darker hues on the other side, in the bathing side, because you don't need super bright lights there. Because just imagine the situation of working there in a space where you're just flooded with lights all day. It's going to hurt. So any way that we can to bring rest to the eyes is an opportunity to, keep people not as upset or irritated.
That's great. Where did you sort of come up with there was like a sort of a forest green color and then like the light salmon, which I think fits really well, and then that darker blue. What were your thoughts on those colors that you chose?
Oh, okay. So, well, I thought this would be an interest since there is no brand style guide, right, to Wogram at this point. I thought, well, why not play with these hues? We have them available, right? Should we be courageous with them and just pour them out and see what happens? And so I thought, oh, it's actually interesting because in these rooms, the red is placed next to the green, right? The purple frames the yellow outside in the grooming area. Those are placed because those are complementary colors, meaning on a color wheel. Have you seen a color wheel before?
I have.
Yeah, so the color wheel, a complementary color is two opposite colors. So that's why you have, say, sports teams, right? If they want to be seen, they want to use opposite colors like yellow and purple, orange and blue. Those colors fight, they cause attention, like Christmas, red and green. So, but to use that next to each other with such strong intensity, it's also very tiring. But if you can tone it down and balance them with a good and clear hierarchy, right? They can actually give the walls or whatever they're looking at like a vibrancy, like a life. Because if you took that and blasted them to 100% next to each other, it can be very irritating. But if you balance them, you tone them down, you kind of carefully balance. So it's like actors on a stage, right? You have the actors, supporting actors, orchestra, backdrop. If they all are the same intensity, it's chaos. But if you can balance them, it's nice. So that's how I kind of organize them, the walls, because I was playing around with them. I was like, oh, this doesn't work, or this the red with the orange, it's too much. And so it was a lot of like, I mean, after all, we're playing with four walls, but it's like
Excellent.
carefully placing those colors.
Gotcha. And then so from the grooming, so we have a specific wall color for the grooming table to sort of reflect that light. What were your thoughts about that color that you chose?
The yellow or
It's
the
yeah, it's like
off-white?
the lighter. I'm not sure the name of it specifically. It's like the one that's going to be right behind the groomer table.
Oh,
So it's
okay,
like
okay. So we have the yellow. Well, I'll talk about the yellow wall first. So
okay,
the yellow wall is something that that Wilgroom they had it from their brand identity from the beginning, and let's use it to define the depth of the space. And that's why I put that in the farthest wall that we can see from the street. That is the Wilgroom yellow. But after that, let's reserve the rest for a more neutral color, so that if we have any grooming jobs, like if there's color work, I don't know if Wilgram's going to be featuring color works in the future, color haircuts, I mean, um, that can serve as a backdrop because it's neutral. Because if you have, say, a bright red or a pink or a green, and you're rotating your dog on the table, or you yourself are rotating around the dog, every time you rotate, you're going to get a different backdrop, and it's going to be really annoying for the groomer. Because as an illustrator myself, having the correct environment around me really determines how the painting turns out. Because after all, a painting doesn't exist in a vacuum. Like a dog doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's all relative to the environment. So if you have the environment while the dog groomers are giving their haircuts a more neutral color, um, it helps to keep that consistency. It helps to see mistakes, any hairs that are popping out. It's much easier to see in that environment.
oh, perfect. Thank you. Yeah, and then maybe last finish with sort of the front back to the front part of the store where sort of the retail is highlighted. You want to talk a little bit about why partners would be interested in that? Sort of the what I really loved about that the FC Datsun fixtures is that it really pops against that that color that you chose. So really the lighting and the chosens of that, just sort of to focus on that once again, addressing that retail that you kind of already spoken about, but just kind of how that
Oh
front sort of
yeah,
takes your eye to certain places of the room.
actually that's a good question because the color of that room is also to serve as a backdrop for the products. Um, I was looking at some of the products that are the pet products out there, and perhaps some of the ones that you guys that Wogram might be exhibiting, like Hydra, for example. It's a bright purple, and the product finishes are either satin or polished plastic. And so, in that case, how can you create a backdrop that pops the elements out, right? It's not, you don't want it to compete, at least for me, right? I'm thinking if you want the space to be calming, then the products on it should have the opportunity to pop because otherwise, where's the actor, right? They're all supporting actors. So the job of the wall is to be a supporting actor, to be the environment and the backdrop for the products to pop out on top of it because the products, the finishes and the colors are usually much brighter than, are going to be much brighter than the wall color. That's why the wall color is the wall color it is. Does it make sense?
Yeah, perfectly. Absolutely. Because yeah, I was as we walk through the renderings, there's a lot of pictures from that up front and to the left and to the right. And just that lighting does really, now that you've kind of spoken to that point, it really sort of brings my eye to the retail spot or to the live wall. So it's either a calming effect or sort of to focus on what we want to focus on. So yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah,
Really
the
kind of
spotlighting is key.
yeah, absolutely. So maybe the last idea is just sort of your overall cohesive idea of how it's come from start to finish and kind of what you're looking for, maybe in the future of different types of ideas that you're playing with and how it kind of maybe could evolve as a brand.
Hmm. I mean, right now, I think Welcome is still figuring out the features that it's adding in. So the space is kind of kept, it's like designed in a way where it's minimal, right? But not minimal to the point where it's empty, because I think once you start to populate and light the objects and give them that hierarchy, the minimalism starts to come together. Because minimalism can break. Because if you, like to say, what are the rooms that people put that have the straight jackets? Like solitary confinement?
Right, right.
Look at the way that those are designed, right? That's minimal. minimalism. Is it
Right.
warm? No, because of the way that it's designed. But you can have quote unquote like warm minimalism, where you have a space that is very more so like nurturing, right? And because of the space having such a large canvas to work with, and having the walls be very intentionally uh, decorated and accessorized, anything that Welcome can do in the future, they can more easily add on. It's almost like modular design. Because now, if you don't like the shelves or you want to shift this thing over, you can because there is so much space. But minimalism can also be punishing if things are not placed correctly. And that's why a lot of these things, like some people say, oh, but it's so simple. Like Apple products are so simple. But it's actually very complex to create simple design. I don't know if that does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, totally. So that I guess really that was sort of a part of your thinking and your idea is sort of that minimalist look, providing these very strategic places for light, and maybe even in the back of the store with the light for the groomers themselves and how that sort of is strategically placed. That was sort of your idea to sort of come into that.
Well, Well, when I first talked with Roger and Mike, because I had no idea what their vision is, and so they talked about um, they talked about the Apple Store, they talked about experiences at spas, and so I thought about borrowing from those aesthetics, right? Because of course the design of the Apple Store is not going to be appropriate because it's too cold, right? It's about technology, even though it's like a space that is warm and there's people in it, um, and the designs are very comfortable looking. It's not appropriate for well-groomed. However, we can borrow from the way that their spaces are organized for well-groomed, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. If you could expand on that perfectly, how sort of the experience from walking in, and sort of how that design simple, that minimalist kind of gives you a feeling. I guess maybe you've sort of covered it in the calming idea, but really, could you expand on that sort of idea?
Okay, so if you can think about how, let's see, if you were to walk into a room, um, we are we're very sensitive to pattern, to light, because we're used to in nature judge the the environment around us to protect ourselves, right? So we're really good at that. And we often make these types of assumptions without in our subconscious. We don't even know that we're doing it. So when you're designing a space and when you're not careful about placing patterns or lighting or materials, it can cause undesirable effects. So in this case, if someone says, "Hey, I want to go towards minimalism," if they're not careful, they can really make the space feel really cold. But in this case, we're trying to use minimalism as like a calming factor, right? We're not trying to populate the walls with a ton of posters or frames to give activity to the walls for the sake of activity. We're asking, well, why are we putting this on the wall first? What does it do to the person, right? If we put this pattern or this logo or this arrangement of shells, what does it do to the feeling of the person? And because when you walk into a room, everything, all those elements in there, it's like a formula um, for the end result of how someone feels. And so with that formula, you have to kind of carefully balance it, and less is more. So the more things you have in a minimalistic space, the more factors that can come in and either make or break it. And so that's why coming into something like this, minimalism has to be really, really carefully considered in order to achieve that calming or grounding effect.
Gotcha. That totally makes sense. So yeah, the least amount of things, it just makes them more important, is what it sounds like.
Yeah, I think was that Coco Chanel? She was talking about like when you leave the house, you can look in the mirror and take something off, right? She's talking about like less is more, because in this case, with the front, sometimes adding something may not help it, and we can always talk about reducing something to make it better. But sometimes, maybe reducing something too much takes it too far away from the experience that you want to create in the front. But of course, it's all guided by, well, what do we want people to feel in the front? If we want them to feel more excited, more crazy, we can put things on the wall that facilitates that feeling. Um, but if you want them to feel calm, sometimes like, oh, well, then eliminate the things you see from eye level first. Lower all the furniture, and only populate when you need to, because otherwise you're accentuating the ceiling. You're bringing attention to where we don't need to, and that may cause people to gaze or feel more agitated. You open the front door, right? It's like metal, and you can smell the food. When you walk from the sidewalk into the store, you can feel the transition of a material from, say, uh, sidewalk concrete to like cashmere carpet. And then you sit, and maybe even the people greeting you too, their uniform, the color palette. When you look into the space, is maybe a deep space. Um, everything is spotlit, dimly lit, so that you're only focusing on your table and everything else just falls away. It creates a sense of relaxation, right?
But even in the Las Vegas store, I do remember the first time I walked into the store, I had sort of a, and I hope this isn't, this is just kind of my initial feeling was almost like a vet feeling, sort of a hospital feel, and it felt good and safe. But as soon as it was the new paint scheme that I saw in Vegas when I walked in, I definitely had a different feeling. And now that you're explaining it, it makes a lot of sense. Because sometimes people with not a design background, they just go into a space and they have feelings that they don't know why, right? And so an explanation
Exactly.
like this, it's perfect. And I think us as a company, I think we're really fortunate to have you and all the the details that you've put into it and thoughts and sometimes you just look at wall paint or a chair and think, oh, it's just thrown in there. But, a good explanation from a great background such as yourself and explaining it that way, I think is really going to help everyone understand it more.
Oh, yeah, of course. My pleasure. And of course, like brands continue to morph, the aesthetic should morph with it. So this aesthetic currently is like a starting ground, right? I'm sure there are many iterations afterwards, but I think this aesthetic right now serves as a good conversation starting point, because now that we can use all these different hues, we have a purpose design for each room. As we add to it, there's like a strong groundwork, there's a foundation with strong justification of why things are the way they are. Then in the future, if we want to add something, we can just add those factors into what we've already built and go from there.
Perfect. I think that's a perfect way to end. I really appreciate your time and looking forward to the future.
Of course, my
All right.
pleasure.
Thanks, Edmund.